Okay, so now we're going to look at a different equity intervention. In this one, I modified it because I think it's more fascinating and more realistic because it actually happened. In this equity intervention, it comes from this article, this chapter I read in Murray Rothbard's Conceived in Liberty, and it was republished on this website as an excerpt, right? And the chapter is titled "The Failure of Wage and Price Control in the Massachusetts Theocracy," and it's written by Murray Rothbard. And it contains a fascinating history of maximum wage laws in the Massachusetts colony. The following example was inspired by this history. Now, suppose the above model here, right, our model, suppose our model here represents the labor market for carpenters in colonial Massachusetts. Merchants and landowners considered the market wage paid to these workers as excessive. In 1633, John Winthrop complained that the scarcity of workmen had caused them to raise their wages to an excessive rate. Now, that's one way to look at it, but is it possible that the people wanting the services of these workmen desperately needing them to do work on their homes or their businesses? Is it possible that they bid up that labor because it was so scarce? Yeah, right. So this outrage led to politicians of the day imposing a maximum wage rate for carpenters, which was, quote, 2 shillings a day without board being, a place to sleep, and I think food, right? And 14 pence with board, right? So I think back in the day, if you hired a carpenter to roof your home, you probably had them stay in your house. And if you let them stay in the house, then you didn't have to pay them as much, right? If they were a local carpenter, then they probably had their own home. They go home to it every night, right? So back then, staying at a Motel 6 or a Holiday Inn or the Plaza was, just not something that people did, right? Now we're going to assume that the 17.7, right, the market wage right here, the 17.70, we're going to assume that is the value of that market wage for the carpenter in today's dollars. Sorry, I had to edit that. I had the wrong variable there. So assuming that this market wage in our model is the value of the carpenter's market wage in today's dollars, right? Because back then, a shilling could buy a lot. Today, a shilling couldn't buy much, right? So we're gonna use we're gonna value that labor back then in 1633 with today's dollars. One, it'll make it more meaningful to you, right? So we're going to assume that 17.7 is the value of that market wage of carpenters back in 1633 in today's dollars. And then we're going to assume that the maximum wage that was imposed in today's dollars is 9.8, right? Now, so if that's the case, then it would have been illegal to hire carpenters and masons at wages exceeding $9.8, right? Per hour, correct? So let's go over here to Desmos and impose a maximum wage rate of 9.8 on the market, right? So graphically, this is what it looks like, right? The height of this red line is 9.8, right? The market wage is up here. This is considered to be excessive by the merchants and landowners of the Massachusetts colony. They don't want to pay $17.70, right? $17.70. So instead, they're gonna impose a maximum wage of 9.8. And what that does is it creates a shortage, right, in labor, because at this lower wage, all these merchants and landowners, now all of a sudden, the projects that were once too expensive to build are now affordable. So what they want to do is they want to do all these projects that they were waiting to do until they had more money, right? So now there's this huge demand for this very scarce labor, right? And so the people of the Massachusetts colony are now demanding labor from 499.54 carpenters, right? Meanwhile, on the other side of the labor market, you have the supply. Why would a carpenter now, if the market wage is 1770 in Massachusetts, it's probably about that in Rhode Island or Connecticut or New Hampshire, right? It's probably roughly that same amount, right? Maybe even New York, right? So if you're a carpenter and you came to New York and you're being paid $15, $16 in New York, and you come to Massachusetts to earn, because you hear it's 1770, right? Because maybe labor is more scarce there, right? And all of a sudden they impose a maximum wage of 9.8. What are you going to do? You're going to head back to where you came from, right? You're not going to do labor in Massachusetts, right? You're going to do it the place you came from, right? Because you were drawn to Massachusetts because you heard about this incredible wage of 1770. When you get there, you realize, oh, they capped it at 9.8, so you leave and go home, right? So the people that populate the labor supply curve from that point, are the carpenters that left the Massachusetts colony and went back to New York, Rhode Island, or Connecticut, or wherever they came from, right? They went back, right? So only 158 people, carpenters, supply their labor at that new wage, right? 158. So we have very few carpenters supplying their labor, and you have landowners and merchants demanding the labor of almost 500, right? And that's what we call a labor shortage, right? That's a labor shortage. Now, there was a labor shortage. I mean, there wasn't really a labor shortage, but the supply of laborers was, limited, right? There was only 315.9 in equilibrium, right? So that wasn't really a shortage because everybody that wanted to hire a carpenter was able to hire a carpenter, right? At this new lower maximum wage rate of 9.8, everybody that wants to hire a carpenter can't, right? Everybody wants to hire 499.54, right? But there's only 158 available for work, right? Now you can see what this might create, right? A very wealthy landowner, right, decide to do what? Break the law and pay one of these 158 the maximum wage they're willing to pay, right? Which is almost 25. This one landowner might be willing to pay a carpenter up to $25, right? And so what happens is the rich people that run the government, they are probably paying carpenters some side cash, right? Maybe not up to their demand curve, but they're paying just enough so middle income people can't afford the carpenters, right, on the black market. So it creates a black market, right? It'll create a black market, right? Okay, so the equity intervention, if there is no black market, the equity intervention means what? It means there's going to be a loss in total surplus, right? And the loss in total surplus is going to be the triangle that is down here pointing toward the equilibrium, right? So with X being equal to 158, the loss in total surplus, the loss in efficiency, is the triangle generated by these 3 points, right? This 158th carpenter, well, merchants are willing to pay up to $24.49 for that person's services, right? But that person only gets paid 9.8, right? And these people have left the colony, right? So you have this big, huge loss in efficiency. We call it deadweight loss, right? So total surplus decreases, right? Oh, real quick, characterize the marginal carpenter in 1633, right? Now these carpenters here that populate this part of the labor supply curve, they have reservation wages from 9.8 up to 17.70, right? So these guys value their time. And a person that knows their value, right? A person that understands their value is going to charge a wage approximately equal to that value, right? So people will generally hire reservation wages in a skilled occupation like carpentry. They probably have more experience, and because they're more experienced and more talented, they feel comfortable charging higher wage rates, right? So this maximum wage causes a brain drain, right? All these carpenters with these reservation wages from 1770 down to $9.80, they leave the colony. Okay, so the carpenters that remain in the colony, they have reservation wages between 1.9 and 9.8. So they're willing to work for very little. And you're probably thinking, what kind of carpenters are they? If this guy only values his services at 1.9, and this guy values his services at 9 point, and you got a bunch of other carpenters somewhere in between, they're probably not the best carpenters or the most competent or the most experienced, right? They're okay with making 9.8, right? So this maximum wage law causes a brain drain, and all the highest quality, most talented carpenters, most experienced carpenters leave for another colony, right? So that's one of the problems with that. So the original marginal carpenter right here, before the price was capped, the wage was capped, that was a very talented, experienced carpenter. Now the marginal carpenter is a guy that who values his services at just 9.8, right? So these carpenters here are not as experienced and talented as these carpenters. So the marginal carpenter skill set and experience is much lower than what it would have been had there been a free market, right?